Chapter 1. The Grip That Broke Everything. The rain fell like bullets on the cracked pavement, but Luna barely felt it through the fire burning across her cheek. Marcus's grip tightened around her throat, his beta strength crushing the breath from her lungs as he slammed her against the alley wall behind the diner where she worked. The brick scraped her shoulder blades raw, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the agony ripping through her chest. The mate bond he'd severed 3 days ago still felt like shattered glass in her soul. "You think you can embarrass me in front of the pack and just walk away?" His voice was a growl, eyes flashing amber in the dim streetlight. Luna clawed at his fingers, her human strength pathetic against his werewolf power. She'd been foolish to think she could hide in the human world, foolish to believe he'd let her go after catching her with another man, even though that man had only been helping her up after she'd tripped. Marcus saw betrayal in every shadow now, paranoia eating him alive since their rejection ceremony went wrong. A shadow moved at the mouth of the alley, and Marcus's head snapped toward it like a predator sensing threat. "Walk away," he snarled, not releasing his grip on Luna's throat. "This doesn't concern you." But the stranger stepped closer, rain streaming down his midnight black hair and expensive suit. His presence filled the narrow space like electricity before a storm, and when his eyes met Luna's, she gasped, not from lack of air, but from the liquid gold burning in his gaze. "Let her go." The stranger's voice was quiet, almost conversational, but it carried a weight that made Marcus's fingers loosen involuntarily. Luna sucked in desperate breaths as the man moved with fluid grace, his movements too smooth, too controlled for any ordinary human. Something primal in her chest recognized power when she saw it, even if she didn't understand what it meant. The stranger was tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp cheekbones and lips curved in a smile that promised violence to anyone who threatened what he claimed as his. Marcus released Luna completely, stepping back with his hands raised, but his eyes never left the stranger's face. "Alpha," he breathed, and Luna's world tilted sideways. This beautiful, dangerous man wasn't human at all. He was something far more terrifying and magnificent. As she slumped against the wall, trembling from shock and relief, the golden-eyed stranger extended one perfectly manicured hand toward her. "Come with me," he said simply. And despite every instinct screaming that she was trading one predator for another, Luna reached out and took his hand. "Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in the Philippines, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are." Now, let's dive into the story. Luna had always known she was different, but she'd never imagined how cruel different could be. The Silvermoon Pack house sat nestled in the Colorado mountains like a postcard, all log beams and stone fireplaces, but it had become her prison the day Marcus claimed her as his mate. She pressed her palm against the kitchen window, watching the other pack members run freely through the forest in their wolf forms, their joy a bitter contrast to the bruises hidden beneath her long sleeves. She was the only human in a pack of werewolves, and Marcus never let her forget it. "You're worthless," he'd whispered just that morning, his breath hot against her ear as she'd tried to serve breakfast to the pack elders. "A human mate is a weakness I can't afford." His fingers had found the tender spot on her ribs where he'd struck her 2 days before, pressing just hard enough to make her wince. The other pack members had looked away, complicit in their silence. Being the beta's mate should have protected her, but Marcus's growing paranoia and violent temper had turned their bond into a nightmare she couldn't escape. The rejection ceremony had been Marcus's idea, performed in front of the entire pack under the full moon 3 nights ago. "I, Marcus Blake of the Silvermoon Pack, reject you, Luna Hayes, as my mate and consort," he declared, his words cutting through her like silver blades. She'd gasped the traditional response through tears. "I, Luna Hayes, accept your rejection." But something had gone wrong. The bond hadn't severed cleanly, leaving jagged edges that still bled in her chest every time her heart beat. The pack shaman had frowned, muttering about incomplete rituals and dangerous magic, but Marcus had been too eager to be free of her to care about the consequences. Now she was caught between worlds, neither fully mated nor truly free, with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Her parents had died in a car crash when she was 17, leaving her alone until Marcus had found her working at a diner in Denver and claimed her as his destined mate. She'd been so grateful for belonging somewhere, for being wanted, that she'd ignored the warning signs until it was too late. The pack laws were clear. Rejected mates had 72 hours to leave pack territory or face execution as rogues. Her time was almost up, and she had exactly $37 in her pocket and a bus ticket to nowhere. That night, as the pack settled into their evening routines, Luna slipped out the back door with nothing but a backpack full of clothes and her mother's silver locket. The forest path that led to the main road seemed darker than usual, shadows moving between the trees like living things. She didn't know that 60 miles away, in a glass tower that scraped the Denver skyline, a pair of golden eyes had suddenly opened in the darkness. She didn't know that Damon Blackthorne, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, had just caught the faintest trace of something that made his wolf howl with recognition. She didn't know her real story was just beginning. The Moonlight Diner squatted on the edge of Denver like a forgotten promise, its neon sign flickering weakly against the pre-dawn darkness. Luna pulled her thin jacket tighter as she approached the weathered glass doors, her breath forming small clouds in the October air. The one ad in the newspaper had been brief: waitress needed, night shift, ask for Sal, but it was the only job she'd found that didn't require references or a permanent address. She'd been sleeping in the bus station for 4 days, using their bathroom to wash her face and brush her teeth, pretending she was waiting for someone who would never come. Sal turned out to be a gruff woman in her 60s with kind eyes and hands scarred from decades of kitchen work. She took one look at Luna's hollow cheeks and the desperation she was trying so hard to hide, and hired her on the spot. "You look like you've got nowhere else to go, honey," she said, tying an apron around Luna's waist. "Neither did I once. This place saved me. Maybe it'll save you too." The work was hard, endless hours on her feet, dealing with drunk truckers and lonely insomniacs who lingered over cold coffee until dawn, but it was honest, and it was hers. The diner's regulars were an odd collection of society's forgotten souls. There was Jimmy, an old man who came in every Tuesday for apple pie and told stories about the wife he'd lost to cancer. Rosa, a young mother who worked 3 jobs and sometimes fell asleep in booth 7 during her break between shifts. Frank, a veteran with haunted eyes who never ordered anything but black coffee and always left exact change. Luna found comfort in their quiet desperation, their simple need for a warm place to exist for a few hours. She wasn't the only one running from something. The apartment above the diner was barely more than a closet with a hot plate and a mattress on the floor, but it was the first space that had been truly hers since her parents died. She decorated the single window with paper flowers she'd folded from napkins and arranged her few possessions, her mother's locket, 3 books, and 2 photographs on the narrow windowsill like treasures in a museum. At night, when the diner closed and the city grew quiet, she would press her palm against the glass and watch the lights of the skyscrapers in the distance, wondering what kind of people lived in those towers of glass and steel. She didn't know that in one of those towers, someone was watching her back. Damon Blackthorne stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, his supernatural vision easily picking out the warm glow of the diner 20 blocks away. For 3 weeks now, he'd felt something calling to him from that direction, a pull he couldn't name or ignore. His wolf paced restlessly beneath his skin, demanding action he didn't understand. Tomorrow, he decided, he would find out what was drawing him toward that tiny beacon of light in the darkness. Tomorrow, everything would change. Luna was refilling the sugar dispensers when he first walked in, and the ceramic container slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers to shatter against the diner's checkered floor. Every conversation in the room seemed to pause as the stranger moved through the door like he owned not just the building, but the very air inside it. He was tall and lean, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Luna made in 6 months, but it was his eyes that made her breath catch. Liquid gold that seemed to see straight through to her soul. "Sorry about that," she stammered, dropping to her knees to collect the broken pieces, acutely aware that those impossible eyes were watching her every movement. When she glanced up, he was standing beside her booth, and she could smell something wild and clean, like pine forests after rain. "Don't worry about it." His voice was warm honey with an edge of steel, and when he extended a hand to help her up, she hesitated for just a moment before accepting. His skin was warm against hers, and for a second she could have sworn she felt electricity arc between their touching palms. "Coffee?" she asked, proud that her voice came out steady, even though her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. He nodded and slid into the corner booth, the one that gave him a clear view of both the front door and the kitchen entrance, a predator's choice of seating that Luna noticed, but didn't fully understand. As she poured his coffee, she caught him studying her with an intensity that made her skin tingle. When their eyes met in the reflection of the window, she saw something wild flash in those golden depths before he looked away. He came back the next night, and the night after that, always ordering the same black coffee and a slice of whatever Paisal had made that day. Luna found herself looking forward to his quiet presence in the corner booth, the way he listened when the other regulars shared their stories, never judging, always understanding. He left generous tips and never complained when she was too busy to chat, but she caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she couldn't decipher, protective, possessive, and infinitely patient, like he was waiting for something only he could see coming. On his 7th visit, Luna finally worked up the courage to ask his name. "Damon," he said simply, not offering a last name or any other details. When she told him hers, something flickered in his golden eyes. Recognition? Relief? Before she could analyze it further, the bell above the door chimed, and Marcus walked in with 2 other Silvermoon Pack members. Luna's blood turned to ice as her ex-maid's eyes swept the diner and landed on her with predatory focus. She didn't see Damon's hand tighten around his coffee cup, or notice how the porcelain began to crack under the pressure of barely contained rage. She only saw Marcus's cruel smile as he approached her station and knew that her brief moment of peace was about to end. Marcus moved through the diner like he owned it, his 2 pack companions flanking him in a formation that made Luna's wolf-raised instincts scream danger. The other customers seemed to sense the menace radiating from the 3 men, conversations dying as they passed. Luna's hands shook as she tried to appear busy cleaning the already spotless counter, but she could feel Marcus's eyes tracking her every movement like a hunter watching wounded prey. When he slid onto a stool directly in front of her, his familiar scent of cedar and aggression made her stomach clench with remembered pain. "Hello, Luna." Marcus's voice was deceptively gentle, but she could hear the threat underneath. "You look different. Healthier." His gaze traveled over her face, noting how the hollow cheeks had filled out, how her hair shone with proper nutrition instead of hanging limp with stress. "This little human life suits you. But you and I both know it can't last." He reached across the counter as if to touch her cheek, and Luna jerked backward so violently she knocked over a stack of menus. The sound was sharp in the suddenly silent diner, and she saw several customers reach for their phones, sensing trouble brewing. From his corner booth, Damon watched the interaction with deadly stillness, every muscle in his body coiled for violence. His wolf was snarling just beneath his skin, demanding he tear apart the male who dared threaten what was his, though when Luna had become his, he couldn't say. He'd spent weeks observing her, drawn by something he couldn't name, but watching Marcus terrify her crystallized every protective instinct he possessed. The beta scent carried the stench of cruelty and possessiveness, and beneath it, something else that made Damon's lip curl in disgust, the sour reek of a bond gone wrong, festering like an infected wound. "I don't want any trouble, Marcus," Luna managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I left like you wanted. I'm not bothering anyone." But Marcus's smile only widened, revealing teeth slightly too sharp for a human face. "Oh, but you're bothering someone." "Me. You see, our little rejection ceremony didn't quite take, did it? The bond is still there, weak but persistent, and it's making me look incompetent in front of the pack elders. They're questioning my fitness to lead." His fingers drummed against the counter with barely restrained violence. Which means you need to come home so we can finish this properly. The temperature in the diner seemed to drop 10 degrees as Damon rose from his booth with fluid grace. He didn't make a sound, but somehow Marcus's attention snapped to him like iron filings to a magnet. When their eyes met across the room, Luna saw Marcus's face go pale beneath his tan, his aggressive posture melting into something that looked dangerously close to submission. "We were just leaving," Marcus said quickly, standing so fast he knocked over his stool. But as he headed for the door with his companions, he leaned close to Luna's ear and whispered, "This isn't over. Tomorrow night, the alley behind this place. Come alone or I'll burn this diner down with everyone inside." And then he was gone, leaving Luna shaking and Damon's golden eyes burning like twin suns in the darkness. Luna couldn't stop her hands from trembling as she cleaned the same table for the 5th time, Marcus's whispered threat echoing in her mind like a curse. The diner felt different now, contaminated by his presence, and every shadow seemed to hide potential danger. She kept glancing toward the corner booth where Damon sat nursing his 3rd cup of coffee, his golden eyes tracking her movements with predatory focus. Something had changed between them during Marcus's visit. The air crackled with unspoken tension, and she caught him staring at her with an expression that made her pulse race for reasons she couldn't name. "You know him." It wasn't a question, and Damon's voice carried a quiet authority that made Luna freeze mid-wipe. She looked up to find him standing beside her table, close enough that she could smell his wild, clean scent and see the flecks of amber in his impossible eyes. "He's dangerous," she said carefully, not wanting to reveal too much about the supernatural world she'd left behind. "My ex. He doesn't take rejection well." The irony of the word rejection made her wince, if only Damon knew how literally true that statement was. Damon studied her face with unsettling intensity, taking in the fear she was trying so hard to hide, the way she unconsciously rubbed at the spot over her heart where the broken mate bond still ached. "He hurt you." Again, not a question, and Luna's composure cracked just enough for him to see the truth. "It's over now," she said, but even she didn't believe the words. Marcus would never let her go, especially not with their bond still partially intact, festering between them like a wound that wouldn't heal. She was trapped between worlds, belonging nowhere, and tomorrow night he would drag her back to face whatever sick punishment he'd devised. What did he want? Damon's voice had dropped to a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through Luna's bones. When she hesitated, he stepped closer, and she caught a glimpse of something wild flickering in his eyes, something that reminded her painfully of home. "He wants me to go back," she whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. "But I can't. I won't." The words came out with more conviction than she felt, and Damon nodded slowly, as if her answer had confirmed something he'd already suspected. As closing time approached and the last customer departed, Damon remained in his booth like a guardian statue, his presence both comforting and unnerving. Luna went through her closing routine mechanically, acutely aware of his gaze following her every movement. When she finally approached his table with the check, he caught her wrist gently, his skin fever-warm against hers. "Don't go tomorrow night," he said quietly. "Whatever he's threatening, it's not worth your life." Luna stared down at his hand wrapped around her wrist, noting how his fingers were long and strong, how carefully he held her despite the obvious power in his grip. "You don't understand," she breathed. "He won't stop. He'll hurt innocent people to get to me." Damon's eyes flashed gold in the diner's fluorescent light, and his smile was sharp as a blade. "Let me worry about that." Luna spent the following day in a state of nervous exhaustion, jumping at every sound, watching the clock crawl toward evening like a death sentence. Sal noticed her distraction and sent her home early with a concerned frown and a thermos of soup she wouldn't eat. The tiny apartment above the diner felt like a cage as Luna paced the few steps from window to wall, her mother's locket clutched in her trembling fingers. Outside, storm clouds gathered like an omen, and she could smell rain on the wind, the same scent that had filled the air the night Marcus first raised his hand to her. As darkness fell, Luna found herself drawn to the window despite her fear, watching the alley behind the diner with morbid fascination. At exactly 11 p.m., 3 familiar figures emerged from a black SUV, Marcus flanked by his pack companions like a general with his soldiers. Even from her second-story perch, she could see the predatory confidence in his movements, the way he scanned the shadows for any sign of her presence. When he tilted his head back and looked directly at her window, his eyes flashed amber in the streetlight, and Luna stumbled backward with a gasp. She waited for the inevitable pounding on her door, the sound of splintering wood as Marcus lost patience and took what he wanted by force. But minutes ticked by in silence, broken only by the rumble of thunder overhead. Curiosity finally overcame terror, and Luna crept back to the window, pressing her face against the cold glass. The alley was empty except for shadows and the first fat drops of rain beginning to fall. The SUV was gone, and there was no sign of Marcus or his companions anywhere. It was as if they'd simply vanished into the night. Relief flooded through her so intensely it made her knees weak, but it was mixed with confusion that made her head spin. Marcus wasn't the type to issue threats he didn't intend to follow through on, and pack law demanded he make good on his ultimatum. Something had changed his mind, but what? Luna was still puzzling over the mystery when she heard footsteps on the narrow stairs leading to her apartment. Her relief curdled into fresh terror. Marcus had simply been playing with her, letting her think she was safe before striking. But the knock on her door was soft, controlled, nothing like Marcus's usual aggressive pounding. "Luna? It's Damon." His voice was muffled by the thin wood, but she caught the note of concern underneath the calm. She opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, his expensive suit replaced by dark jeans and a leather jacket that made him look dangerous in an entirely different way. Rain had darkened his black hair, and there were drops of water on his sharp cheekbones that caught the light like tears. "Are you all right?" he asked, and Luna nodded mutely, not trusting her voice. What she didn't see was the blood under his fingernails, or smell the scent of fear and submission that clung to his clothes like smoke. What she didn't know was that Marcus and his companions were currently fleeing back to Colorado with their tails between their legs, carrying a message that would change everything. Damon stepped into Luna's tiny apartment without waiting for an invitation, his presence instantly making the cramped space feel even smaller. He moved through her few possessions like he was cataloging them, taking in the paper flowers on the windowsill, the carefully arranged photographs, the narrow bed that took up most of the floor space. Luna watched him nervously, acutely aware of how intimate this felt, having him in her private space, seeing how little she owned, how carefully she'd tried to make this temporary shelter feel like home. But there was something different about his movements now, a deliberate precision that suggested he was looking for something specific among her meager belongings. His gaze lingered on the 2 photographs she'd arranged so carefully on the windowsill, one of her parents on their wedding day, radiant and young, and another of the 3 of them when Luna was maybe 5 years old, sitting in what looked like a garden bursting with impossible flowers. Damon reached for the second photograph with careful reverence, and Luna noticed how his fingers trembled slightly as he lifted it to the light. "Your mother," he said quietly, and it wasn't a question. She was beautiful. And powerful. The way he said the last word made Luna's stomach clench with sudden unease, as if he could see something in that faded image that she'd missed her entire life. "They're gone," he said simply, setting the photograph back down with meticulous care before turning to face her with those unnerving golden eyes. "Marcus and his friends. They won't be bothering you again." Luna stared at him, confusion and relief warring in her chest, but underneath both emotions was a growing awareness that this conversation was heading somewhere she wasn't prepared for. "How do you know that?" she asked, and something flickered in his expression, satisfaction, maybe, or the ghost of violence recently committed. "I convinced them it wasn't in their best interest to stay in Denver," he said, and the casual way he said it made Luna's skin prickle with awareness that there was far more to Damon than expensive suits and quiet coffee orders. The air in the small apartment seemed to thicken with unspoken truths, and Luna found herself backing toward the window as Damon's presence filled every corner of the space. She could smell rain on the wind outside, but underneath it was something else, something that reminded her of her childhood home, of her mother's garden where flowers bloomed out of season and herbs grew in impossible abundance. Her mother had always claimed to have a green thumb, but looking back now with adult eyes, Luna remembered how the plants had seemed to respond to her touch, how cuts and bruises healed faster when her mother applied her homemade remedies, how the house had always felt protected from the worst storms and the darkest nights. "Who are you?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, and Damon went very still, like a predator deciding whether to reveal his fangs. For a long moment, the only sound in the apartment was the rain pattering against the single window and Luna's own rapid heartbeat. When he finally answered, his voice carried a weight that seemed to press against her bones. "Someone who protects what matters to him." The possessive pronoun hung in the air between them like a promise and a threat, and Luna felt her pulse spike in response. But there was something else in his expression now, a careful consideration that suggested he was weighing how much truth she could handle. She should have been afraid. Every instinct warned her that Damon was dangerous, that his stillness was the calm before a storm that could destroy her. But instead of fear, she felt something else entirely, a wild, reckless attraction that made her want to step closer instead of backing away. There was something familiar about his presence, something that called to the part of her that had lived among wolves, that had learned to read dominance and submission in the tilt of a head or the set of shoulders. Damon radiated power like heat from a fire, and despite everything she'd endured, Luna found herself drawn to that strength like a moth to flame. Yet underneath her attraction was a growing certainty that he knew things about her family, her past, her very nature, that she didn't understand herself. "I should go," Damon said, but he made no move toward the door. Instead, he stepped closer, close enough that Luna had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Unless you want me to stay." The offer was quiet, careful, but loaded with implications that made Luna's breath catch in her throat. She knew she should say no, should maintain the careful distance that had kept her safe since leaving the pack. But as thunder rolled overhead and rain lashed the windows, the thought of being alone with her fears felt unbearable. More than that, she could sense that Damon was offering more than just companionship. He was offering answers to questions she'd carried her entire life. "Stay," she whispered, and watched something wild and triumphant flash in Damon's golden eyes before he smiled. The expression transformed his sharp features, making him look younger and infinitely more approachable, but it didn't hide the predatory satisfaction in his gaze. He settled into her single chair with fluid grace, his long frame making the furniture look like a child's toy, and Luna perched on the edge of her bed, hyper-aware of how the small space forced them into an intimacy that felt both thrilling and terrifying. The storm outside seemed to wrap around them like a cocoon, cutting them off from the outside world and creating a bubble where truth might finally be possible. "You have questions?" Damon said, and it wasn't really a question. His golden eyes never left her face, cataloging every micro-expression, every flutter of fear or curiosity that crossed her features. "I can see them in your eyes, the way you look at that photograph of your parents, the way you react when I mention your mother's power. You've always known you were different, haven't you? Not just because you couldn't shift, but because of other things. Small things that everyone else dismissed as coincidence or imagination." His voice was hypnotic, drawing her deeper into memories she'd tried so hard to forget or rationalize away. Luna's throat felt dry as desert sand, but she forced herself to speak. "When I was little, I used to have dreams. Not normal dreams, but visions, I guess. I'd see things before they happened, Marcus getting angry, storms coming, sometimes even accidents that wouldn't occur for days or weeks. My mother said it was just an overactive imagination, but she always seemed to take my warnings seriously. She'd change our plans, keep me home from school, make sure we avoided whatever I'd seen." The memories came flooding back as she spoke, details she'd buried under years of pack conditioning that had taught her such things were impossible, dangerous to even discuss. "What else?" Damon's voice was gentle but implacable, drawing the truth from her like a skilled interrogator who knew exactly what buttons to push. Luna found herself unable to look away from his golden eyes, mesmerized by the way they seemed to glow in the apartment's dim lighting. Sometimes things would move when I was upset. Nothing big, just pencils rolling off tables, books falling from shelves, that sort of thing. And plants. She hesitated, remembering her mother's garden with its impossible blooms and miraculous harvests. Plants always grew better around me. Even now, the few houseplants Sal has at the diner seem healthier when I'm working. Damon leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, and Luna caught a glimpse of something that might have been excitement flickering in his expression. Your mother never told you what she really was, did she? The question hit Luna like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs. She stared at him, her mind racing through half-remembered conversations, moments when her mother had seemed to know things she shouldn't, times when their house had felt different from other places, warmer, safer, touched by something that defied explanation. What do you mean? Luna's voice came out barely above a whisper, but even as she asked the question, pieces were beginning to click into place in her mind. Her mother's herb garden that produced healing remedies more effective than anything the pack healers could create. The way storms always seemed to pass over their house without causing damage. The strange books written in languages Luna couldn't identify that her mother kept locked in a trunk in the attic. The way her mother's eyes sometimes seemed to flash with their own inner light when she was angry or protective. Damon reached for the photograph again, holding it up so Luna could see her parents' faces clearly in the apartment's soft lighting. Your father was indeed a Luna bloodline wolf, one of the most powerful ever born. That much is true. But your mother. He paused, studying the image with an expression of deep respect and something that might have been regret. Your mother was Celeste Ravencroft, the most powerful hedge witch of her generation, descended from a bloodline that traces back to the Salem trials and beyond. She wasn't just human, Luna. She was a guardian, part of an ancient coven that has been protecting Luna bloodlines for over 3 centuries. The words hit Luna like a series of physical blows, each revelation more staggering than the last. She felt the world tilt sideways around her, everything she thought she knew about her identity crumbling like a house built on sand. That's impossible, she breathed, but even as she denied it, memories were surfacing, her mother humming while she worked in the garden, and how the plants seemed to sway in rhythm with her voice even when there was no wind. The way her mother's touch could soothe any pain, heal any wound, calm any storm of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her young daughter. The coven has records going back generations, Damon continued, his voice gentle but relentless. Detailed histories of every Luna bloodline birth, every potential match, every threat that arose. When your father met your mother, it wasn't chance, it was destiny orchestrated by forces that understood the importance of what their union could create. A child who carried both the spiritual power of the Luna bloodline and the elemental magic of the Ravencroft witches. You, Luna, are something that hasn't existed for over 200 years, a true hybrid. Luna's hands were shaking so violently she had to clench them into fists to make them stop. But I can't shift, she protested, grasping for the one constant truth that had defined her entire existence. I have no wolf, no supernatural abilities. I'm just broken. The word came out bitter and familiar, shaped by years of Marcus's psychological abuse and her own desperate attempts to understand why she was different from every other member of her pack. Damon's expression gentled, and he leaned forward until he could reach out and cover her clenched fists with his warm hands. You don't shift because your power doesn't lie in physical transformation. It lies in something far more dangerous, the ability to manipulate the very fabric of reality itself. Every coincidence in your life, every storm that changed course, every moment when things worked out just a little too perfectly to be chance. That was you, Luna, unconsciously bending the world to your will through a combination of witch magic and Luna bloodline intuition. The storm outside seemed to intensify as Luna struggled to process what Damon was telling her, wind howling around the building and rain lashing against the windows with increasing fury. But instead of feeling threatened by the weather, Luna found herself oddly comforted by it, as if the storm was responding to her emotional turmoil and offering its own form of protection. The thought should have seemed ridiculous, but after everything Damon had just revealed, she found herself wondering if perhaps it wasn't so impossible after all. The night your parents died, Damon continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, it wasn't just Marcus's father who came for you. The supernatural world had discovered what you were, a hybrid with the potential to reshape the balance of power between witches and werewolves. Some wanted to control you, others wanted to destroy you before you could reach your full potential. Your parents died protecting not just their daughter, but the secret of what their love had created. Luna felt tears streaming down her face, grieving not just for her parents, but for the innocent girl she'd been, the one who'd grown up thinking she was broken instead of blessed, defective instead of divine. They could have told me, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. They could have prepared me, taught me how to use whatever power I supposedly have instead of letting me think I was worthless for 23 years. They planned to, Damon said gently, his thumbs tracing soothing circles across her knuckles. Your mother left detailed journals, spell books, everything you would need to understand and develop your abilities. But she hid them, scattered across the country in places only someone with your specific magical signature could find. She knew that if you were discovered too young, before you were ready, you'd be destroyed by the very power that makes you extraordinary. The implications of what he was saying hit Luna like a thunderbolt. The trunk in the attic, she breathed, remembering how her mother had always kept it locked, how she'd claimed it contained just old books and family papers. And the garden shed, the way she was always burying things in specific spots. Her voice trailed off as she realized that her mother had been leaving her a treasure hunt, a way to discover her heritage when she was emotionally and mentally prepared to handle the truth. Damon nodded, his golden eyes warm with approval at her quick understanding. Your mother was brilliant. She knew that forcing magical knowledge on someone who wasn't ready could be devastating. So she created a system where you would find the pieces of your inheritance naturally, when your power was strong enough to guide you to them. Every major trauma in your life, every moment of genuine need, was designed to unlock another layer of your abilities. That's why Marcus couldn't complete the rejection, Luna said suddenly, the pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. It wasn't because something went wrong with the ceremony, it was because my magic wouldn't let him sever a bond that was part of my protection. The realization should have been empowering, but instead it filled her with a complicated mixture of gratitude and resentment. Even her mother's love had come with strings attached, with manipulation disguised as protection. Exactly, Damon confirmed. And it's why I was drawn to you from 60 miles away, why every alpha instinct I possess screams that you're mine to protect and claim. Your hybrid nature calls to the most dominant wolves because we're the only ones strong enough to stand beside you when your power fully manifests. Lesser males would be consumed by it, driven mad by the responsibility of protecting something so precious and dangerous. Luna looked up at him, seeing her own reflection in his golden eyes, and for the first time in her life, she looked powerful instead of broken. What happens now? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Do I go on a magical scavenger hunt to find my mother's hidden treasures? Do I learn to cast spells and brew potions like something out of a fairy tale? The questions came out tinged with hysteria, the normal reaction of someone whose entire worldview had just been turned upside down. Damon's smile was warm and reassuring, but underneath it Luna caught a glimpse of something predatory and possessive that made her pulse quicken. Now you learn who you really are, he said simply. And I help you become everything your parents dreamed you could be. But Luna. His voice dropped to a rumble that seemed to vibrate through her bones. Once you start down this path, there's no going back. The supernatural world has been waiting 23 years for you to awaken. When you do, everyone will want to either control you or destroy you. The only safety you'll have is in being strong enough to protect yourself and choosing allies powerful enough to stand with you against anything that comes. The weight of destiny settled around Luna's shoulders like a cloak she'd never asked to wear, but as she looked into Damon's eyes, she realized she wasn't as afraid as she should be. For the first time in her life, the pieces of who she was actually made sense. Her inability to shift, her strange dreams, the way reality seemed to bend around her when she was in crisis. She wasn't broken. She was something unprecedented, something that carried the hopes and fears of two entire supernatural communities. "Then teach me," she said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "Show me what I'm capable of. Help me find what my mother left for me." "But Damon." She met his gaze directly, letting him see the steel that had kept her alive through Marcus's abuse and months of homelessness. "I won't be anyone's weapon or anyone's prize. Whatever power I have, whatever I become, it's mine to control." Damon's eyes flashed with something that looked like pride mixed with desire, and when he smiled, Luna caught a glimpse of fangs. "I wouldn't have it any other way," he said, and she believed him. As thunder crashed overhead and lightning illuminated the small apartment, Luna felt the first stirrings of something she'd never experienced before. Not just hope, but anticipation for a future that promised to be anything but ordinary. The storm outside matched the tension crackling between them as Damon settled onto Luna's single chair, his long frame making the furniture look like a child's toy. Luna perched on the edge of her bed, hyper-aware of how the small space forced them into intimacy whether she wanted it or not. Lightning flashed outside, throwing stark shadows across Damon's sharp features, and in that brief illumination, she caught a glimpse of something predatory in his expression that made her pulse race with equal parts fear and attraction. "Tell me about him," Damon said quietly, his golden eyes never leaving her face. "About what he did to you." Luna's first instinct was to deflect, to minimize, to protect herself with the lies she'd been telling for months. But something in Damon's expression, patient, implacable, genuinely caring, broke down her defenses. "He was my mate," she said, the word feeling strange on her tongue after weeks of trying to forget it existed. "In my community, that's supposed to be sacred. Permanent. But he decided I wasn't good enough, so he threw me away." Damon's stillness took on a different quality, dangerous and focused. "Mate," he repeated, and Luna caught the way his voice lingered on the word, testing its weight. She'd said too much, revealed the supernatural truth she'd been hiding, but it was too late to take it back now. "You know what that means," she said, not really a question, and watched as something shifted in Damon's expression, understanding, recognition, and beneath it all, a possessive satisfaction that made her stomach flutter with nervous butterflies. "I know," he said simply, and the admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they wanted to cross. Luna found herself studying his face in the intermittent lightning, noting details she'd somehow missed before. The slightly pointed ears, the way his canine teeth were just a fraction too sharp, the predatory grace that marked him as something far more dangerous than any ordinary human. "You're like them," she breathed, and Damon's smile was all sharp edges and barely contained wildness. "Not like them," he corrected, rising from his chair with fluid movement that made Luna's breath catch. "Better than them. Stronger." He approached slowly, giving her time to retreat if she chose, but Luna found herself frozen by the intensity in his golden eyes. When he knelt in front of her, bringing them to eye level, she could smell the wild, clean scent of him, could see the flecks of amber that made his irises look like liquid gold. "You're not human either, are you?" he asked softly, and Luna's hand flew instinctively to her throat, to the place where Marcus's marks had faded but never fully disappeared. "I don't know what I am," she admitted, the words torn from somewhere deep in her chest. "I never shifted, never felt the change. Maybe I'm just broken." Damon's expression gentled, and when he reached out to cup her face in his warm palm, Luna didn't pull away. "You're not broken," he said with quiet conviction. "You're something else entirely. Something precious." Dawn was breaking outside Luna's window when Damon finally told her the truth. They'd spent the night talking in careful circles around the supernatural elephant in the room, sharing stories that revealed everything and nothing, testing the boundaries of trust like wolves circling each other in the wild. Luna had dozed fitfully against his shoulder while he sat guard in her chair, and she woke to find him watching her with an expression so tender it made her chest ache with longing she didn't dare acknowledge. "My name is Damon Blackthorne," he said as she sat up, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "I'm the Alpha King of the Northern Territories." The words hit Luna like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs. Alpha King, that was a title whispered in reverence and terror among the smaller packs, a legend more than a man. The wolves who ruled from the glass towers of the cities, who commanded loyalty from thousands of pack members, who could crush rebellions with a thought. Luna stared at him in shock, trying to reconcile the gentle man who'd held her through her nightmares with the monster stories said would tear apart anyone who opposed him. That's why Marcus ran, she whispered, understanding flooding through her like ice water. He smelled you on me, didn't he? Recognized your authority. Damon nodded slowly, his golden eyes never leaving her face. Betas know better than to challenge an Alpha King, especially over something he's already claimed as his own. The possessive words sent a shiver down Luna's spine that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the way his voice dropped to a growl when he said claimed. She should run, should be terrified, should put as much distance as possible between herself and this dangerous, powerful man who spoke of owning her like she was a prize to be won. Instead, she found herself leaning closer, drawn to the heat radiating from his skin and the promise of safety she'd never felt with Marcus. "Is that what I am to you?" she asked, proud that her voice came out steady. "Something to be claimed?" Damon's expression shifted, becoming something raw and vulnerable that transformed his sharp features. "You're everything," he said simply, the words carrying a weight that made Luna's heart stutter in her chest. "From the moment I caught your scent on the wind, my wolf knew. You're mine, Luna, the same way I'm yours. The same way the sun belongs to the sky. The mate bond." Not the broken, festering thing she'd shared with Marcus, but something clean and bright and powerful, snapped into place between them like a rubber band pulled taut and suddenly released. Luna gasped, her hand flying to her chest as warmth flooded through her veins, washing away the last poisonous traces of her connection to Marcus. For the first time in months, she felt whole, complete, like a puzzle piece finally finding where it belonged. Damon's eyes flared gold, and she could see his wolf looking back at her, wild and possessive and utterly devoted. "Now you know," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Luna stared at Damon, her mind reeling from the implications of what had just happened. The mate bond hummed between them like a live wire, sending sparks of sensation through her nervous system with every breath. She could feel his emotions now. The careful control he maintained over his wolf, the fierce protectiveness that made him want to wrap her in his arms and never let her go, the patient devotion that had drawn him to her night after night in the diner. It was overwhelming and terrifying and more right than anything she'd ever experienced. The connection pulsed with golden warmth, wrapping around her consciousness like silk threads that bound her to him in ways she was only beginning to understand. For a moment, Luna basked in the euphoria of finally belonging somewhere, of being wanted and valued and seen as precious rather than broken. The mate bond sang through her veins like the most beautiful music she'd ever heard, promising safety and love and a future where she would never again have to face the world alone. She could feel Damon's wolf recognizing her on a level that transcended conscious thought, claiming her as his mate with a certainty that should have been comforting. This was what she'd dreamed of during the darkest days with Marcus, a bond built on genuine affection rather than possessive control, a partnership between equals rather than predator and prey. "I don't understand," she said, pressing her palms against her temples as if she could stop the world from spinning out of control. But even as she spoke, something was shifting in her awareness, like clouds parting to reveal a landscape she'd never noticed before. The euphoria of the mate bond was still there, but underneath it was something else, a strange clarity that made her question why she felt so perfectly, blissfully content when moments before she'd been terrified and confused. "I'm nobody, nothing special. I couldn't even shift for my original pack, couldn't be the mate Marcus needed. Why would someone like you want someone like me?" The questions poured out of her like poison from a wound, all the insecurities and self-doubt that Marcus had planted in her heart during their toxic relationship. But as she spoke, Luna noticed something odd. Her usual anxiety about voicing these fears was muted, replaced by a dreamy contentment that felt foreign in her own mind. It was as if someone had draped a warm blanket over her emotions, softening the sharp edges of her trauma and replacing them with a golden haze of well-being. She saw Damon's expression darken, his hands clenching into fists as he absorbed the depth of damage her former mate had inflicted, but even his obvious anger couldn't pierce the strange serenity that had settled over her thoughts. "Look at me," Damon commanded, his alpha voice cutting through her spiral of panic. When Luna's eyes snapped to his, she saw gold fire burning in their depths, and something else, a flicker of power that seemed to reach out and caress her mind with invisible fingers. Marcus was a fool who couldn't recognize treasure when he held it in his hands. "You think you're powerless because you can't shift? Luna, you survived months of abuse from a wolf twice your size. You escaped a pack that would have killed you for existing. You built a new life from nothing but determination and courage. That's not weakness. That's the strength of someone born to stand beside an alpha king." The conviction in his voice made Luna's chest tight with emotion she didn't know how to process, but underneath that emotion was a growing awareness that something was wrong. The feelings coursing through her were too perfect, too precisely calibrated to override her natural caution and self-preservation instincts. No one had ever spoken to her like that, like she was valuable for who she was rather than what she could provide, but the warmth his words generated felt artificially amplified, like someone had turned up the volume on her emotional responses. Marcus had always focused on her limitations, the ways she failed to meet pack expectations, but Damon saw something else entirely, or was making her believe he saw something else entirely. When he reached for her hands, she let him take them, feeling the calluses on his palms and the careful way he held her like she was made of spun glass. But as their skin made contact, Luna felt a jolt of awareness that cut through the golden haze surrounding her thoughts like a blade through silk. For just a moment, she could smell something underneath Damon's clean, wild scent, something musky and compelling that seemed to bypass her conscious mind and speak directly to her hindbrain, whispering messages of safety and attraction and inevitable surrender. "I'm not asking you to decide right now," Damon said softly, his thumbs tracing gentle circles across her knuckles. Each touch sent waves of artificial calm through her system, but Luna was beginning to recognize the sensation for what it was, manipulation disguised as comfort. "This is a lot to process, and you've been through hell. But I want you to know that whatever you choose, you're under my protection. Marcus can't touch you, and neither can his pack. You're safe, Luna, for the first time since your parents died. That doesn't change whether you accept this bond or not." The offer was generous, more than she'd dared hope for, but as the words washed over her, Luna felt the strange fog in her mind lifting like morning mist burned away by sunlight. The golden warmth of artificial contentment began to fade, replaced by a cold clarity that made her stomach drop with horrified realization. She could see the tension in Damon's shoulders, the way his jaw tightened as he waited for her answer, but more than that, she could suddenly perceive the invisible waves of influence radiating from his skin, the pheromones that had been clouding her judgment since the moment he'd first walked into the diner. "Oh God," Luna whispered, yanking her hands away from his touch as if his skin had burned her. The movement was so sudden and violent that Damon rocked backward, confusion flickering across his sharp features. Without the constant chemical influence of his presence, Luna's mind felt startlingly clear, like someone had just removed glasses she hadn't realized she'd been wearing. The euphoria of the mate bond was still there, but it no longer felt overwhelmingly right. Instead, it felt suspect, tainted by the possibility that her emotions had been artificially enhanced from their very first meeting. "What?" Damon asked, genuine concern coloring his voice as he watched Luna scramble backward on her narrow bed, putting as much distance between them as the tiny apartment would allow. "Luna, what's wrong? Talk to me." But even his worried questions carried that underlying current of compulsion, the subtle psychic pressure that had been shaping her responses without her knowledge. Now that she could perceive it clearly, Luna felt sick with the realization of how thoroughly she'd been manipulated, how every moment of attraction and growing trust had potentially been manufactured by forces beyond her control. The pheromones, Luna said, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying an accusation that made Damon go perfectly still. You've been influencing me. Since the first night in the diner, maybe even before that. I can smell them now, feel them trying to make me calm and compliant and grateful for your attention. Her hands were shaking as she pressed them against her temples, trying to sort through weeks of memories to determine which of her feelings had been genuine and which had been chemically induced. How long have you been doing it? How long have you been making me feel things that aren't real? Damon's face went through a series of expressions, confusion, realization, and then horror so profound it seemed to drain the color from his skin. No, he breathed, his golden eyes wide with shock that looked utterly genuine. Luna, no, I would never. I didn't know. But even as he denied it, she could see understanding dawning in his expression, the terrible recognition of a power he possessed but had never consciously wielded. His hands flew to his throat as if he could somehow contain the chemical signals his body had been broadcasting, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough with self-loathing. Alpha Kings, he said slowly, each word seeming to cost him tremendous effort. We have abilities that lesser alphas don't possess. Enhanced physical strength, stronger pack bonds, and... He paused, swallowing hard before continuing. The ability to produce pheromones that can influence the emotions of potential mates. But it's supposed to be a conscious choice, something we control deliberately. I swear to you, Luna, I had no idea I was doing it unconsciously. The explanation should have been reassuring, but instead it only deepened Luna's sense of violation. Every moment of growing attraction, every time she'd felt inexplicably safe in his presence, every instance when her natural caution had been overridden by artificial trust. All of it was potentially the result of biochemical manipulation she'd been powerless to resist. How can I believe anything you're saying now? She asked, her voice cracking with the weight of betrayal. How do I know this conversation isn't being influenced too? How do I know any of my feelings for you are real? Damon looked as if she'd struck him, his sharp features crumpling with genuine anguish that would have been heartbreaking if Luna could trust it was authentic. Because I'm going to leave, he said quietly, rising from her chair with movements that seemed to cost him tremendous effort. I'm going to walk out of here and not come back until you've had time to think clearly, without any chemical influence clouding your judgment. If what you feel for me is real, it will still be there when your system is completely clear of my pheromones. But as he moved toward the door, Luna felt a spike of panic that had nothing to do with artificial chemical enhancement and everything to do with the terrifying prospect of being alone with this new knowledge. Wait, she called out, hating how small her voice sounded. How long? How long before I can trust my own emotions again? The question carried implications that made her chest tight with anxiety. If Damon's influence had been shaping her responses for weeks, how long would it take for her natural emotional baseline to reassert itself? Damon paused with his hand on the doorknob, his shoulders rigid with tension. 72 hours, he said without turning around. Maybe longer, depending on how sensitive you are to pheromone influence. But Luna. He did turn then, and the raw vulnerability in his expression took her breath away. I need you to know that everything I told you about your heritage, about what you are, that's all true. The mate bond between us may have been enhanced by chemical influence, but your bloodline, your power, the danger you're in from people who want to use you, none of that changes. The reminder of the supernatural politics surrounding her existence sent a fresh wave of fear through Luna's system, but this time it felt clean and sharp, unfiltered by artificial calm. So even if I reject this bond, even if I decide I can't trust what I feel for you, I'm still trapped, she said bitterly. Still just a prize to be won or a threat to be eliminated, depending on who finds me first. The unfairness of it all, discovering she had incredible power only to learn she might never be free to use it on her own terms, made her want to scream with frustrated rage. Not trapped, Damon said firmly, his alpha authority cutting through her spiral of despair even without the chemical enhancement. Protected. Whatever you decide about us, about this bond, I will make sure you're safe while you learn to control your abilities. That's not negotiable, Luna. Too many people have failed to protect you already. I won't be another one, regardless of whether you choose to be with me. The promise should have been comforting, but instead it highlighted the impossible position Luna found herself in. How could she make a free choice about her future when every option seemed to involve surrendering her independence to someone more powerful? How could she trust any emotion or attraction when her brain chemistry had been compromised for weeks? The magnitude of the deception, even if unintentional, felt like a betrayal that cut deeper than Marcus's conscious cruelty, because at least with Marcus she'd always known where she stood. I need to think, Luna said finally, wrapping her arms around herself as if she could physically hold together the pieces of her shattered certainty. I need time to figure out what's real and what was just chemical manipulation. And I need... She paused, struggling to articulate the complex mixture of anger, hurt, and desperate longing churning in her chest. I need to know that you understand how violated this makes me feel, even if you didn't mean to do it. Damon's expression crumpled with what looked like genuine remorse, and for a moment Luna caught a glimpse of the man beneath the Alpha King facade, someone who was perhaps as trapped by his supernatural nature as she was by hers. I understand, he said quietly. And I'm sorry, Luna. Sorrier than I can possibly express. What I did to you, even unconsciously, is unforgivable. The fact that my wolf recognized you as my mate doesn't excuse the fact that I compromised your ability to make a free choice about that bond. The acknowledgement of wrongdoing should have felt validating, but instead it only emphasized how complex and morally ambiguous her situation had become. Luna found herself wondering if this was what it meant to be supernatural, constantly navigating power dynamics and biological imperatives that overrode human concepts of consent and free will. The thought was both terrifying and oddly liberating, suggesting that perhaps the rules she'd been raised to follow no longer applied to her reality. As Damon moved toward the door again, Luna felt a confusing mixture of relief and loss. Part of her, the part that might or might not have been chemically influenced, wanted to call him back, to accept his protection and the promise of belonging that came with it. But the clearer, more rational part of her brain recognized that she needed time and space to sort through the wreckage of her assumptions about love, choice, and the nature of supernatural bonds. 72 hours, she repeated, more to herself than to him. And then what? I decide whether to trust you again, whether to accept a bond that might have been built on biochemical lies, whether to believe that someone as powerful as you could actually want someone as ordinary as me for reasons that have nothing to do with my bloodline. The questions hung in the air between them like challenges she wasn't sure either of them was prepared to answer. Damon paused in the doorway, his profile sharp against the hallway light. And then you decide what kind of life you want to build, he said simply. With or without me, but with full knowledge of what you are and what you're capable of. That's the only choice that matters, Luna, not whether you trust me, but whether you trust yourself to shape your own destiny. As the door closed behind him with a soft click, Luna was left alone with the sudden, overwhelming silence of her own thoughts. Without Damon's presence filling the space, her tiny apartment felt cavernous and cold, but her mind felt clearer than it had in weeks. She could still feel the ghost of the mate bond humming in her chest, but now it felt like a question rather than an answer, a possibility rather than an inevitability. For the first time since her parents' death, Luna Hayes was truly free to choose her own path. The realization was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, because with that freedom came the responsibility to decide not just who she wanted to be with, but who she wanted to become. As rain continued to lash against her windows and thunder rolled overhead, Luna began the difficult work of separating her authentic feelings from the golden haze of chemical influence that had been shaping her reality for longer than she cared to admit. The next 72 hours would determine everything, not just whether she could trust Damon Blackthorne, but whether she could trust herself to navigate a supernatural world where power and desire intertwined in ways that defied every human understanding of love and choice she'd ever known. 3 days passed in a strange bubble of normalcy that felt more fragile than spun glass. Damon had returned to whatever mysterious business occupied in Alpha King's time, but Luna could feel his presence like a constant warmth in the back of her mind, the mate bond providing a connection that transcended physical space. He'd left her with a phone number and strict instructions to call him if anything seemed wrong, but Luna found herself hesitating to use it, still struggling to believe that someone so powerful would drop everything to come to her aid. The diner felt different now, charged with new possibility and the ghost of Damon's presence. Sal noticed the change in Luna's demeanor, the way she hummed while she worked and how the dark circles under her eyes had finally started to fade. "That man's good for you," she said bluntly while they cleaned tables after the lunch rush. "Haven't seen you smile like that since you first walked through that door." Luna blushed, knowing she couldn't explain the supernatural complexities of what was happening, but grateful for Sal's simple acceptance of her happiness. But happiness, Luna was learning, was a luxury that came with its own dangers. On Thursday evening, as she was counting tips in the empty diner, a familiar scent made her blood freeze in her veins. Not Marcus, she would have felt his presence through their severed bond, but something else, something that smelled like home and pack and the forest she'd grown up in. When she looked up, a woman stood by the front door, her silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights and her pale blue eyes fixed on Luna with laser intensity. "Hello, child," the woman said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Luna recognized her immediately, Elena Winters, the pack shaman who'd presided over her disastrous rejection ceremony. The old woman moved through the diner with predatory grace that belied her apparent age, her nostrils flaring slightly as she scented the air around Luna. "You smell different," she observed, settling into the same booth Damon had claimed as his own. "Stronger. More complete." Luna's hands trembled as she poured coffee she was certain Elena wouldn't drink, the familiar motions helping her maintain some semblance of calm. "What do you want?" she asked, proud that her voice came out steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. Elena smiled, the expression sharp as broken glass. "I came to see what kind of mess you and Marcus made of that rejection ritual. Imagine my surprise when I discovered you've gone and mated yourself to someone far more dangerous than a simple beta." The shaman's eyes glittered with malicious amusement. "Damon Blackthorne, Alpha King of the Northern Territories. My dear child, do you have any idea what you've gotten yourself into?" Elena's presence in the diner felt like a violation, contaminating the safe space Luna had built for herself with the toxic politics of pack life she'd tried so hard to escape. The shaman's pale eyes seemed to catalog every detail of Luna's new life, the healthy glow in her cheeks, the way she stood straighter now, the protective scent markers that clung to her clothes and skin. But there was something else in Elena's expression now, a cruel satisfaction that went beyond simple predatory interest. When Elena smiled, it was the expression of someone who held secrets that could destroy everything Luna thought she knew about herself. "You still don't know what you are, do you?" Elena asked, her voice carrying mock sympathy that made Luna's skin crawl. But underneath the condescension was something darker, a gleeful anticipation that suggested the shaman was savoring every moment of Luna's confusion. "Per little lost lamb, bouncing from one powerful male to another without understanding why they're so drawn to you. Marcus saw it first, felt the pull of your bloodline, but he was too weak and stupid to handle what you represented. Damon Blackthorne, though." She paused, sipping the coffee Luna had poured with obvious relish, her pale eyes never leaving Luna's face. "Now there's a male who knows exactly what prize he's claimed." Luna set down the coffee pot with careful precision, fighting the urge to throw it at the smug woman's head. Every instinct screamed danger, but not the kind she'd learned to recognize during her months with Marcus. This was something more insidious, the threat of truth weaponized against her, secrets turned into instruments of psychological torture. "I don't know what game you're playing, but I'm not interested. I left the pack. I left all of this behind." But even as she spoke, Luna could feel her carefully constructed new life crumbling around the edges, reality shifting in ways that made her stomach clench with dread. Elena just laughed, the sound like breaking bells mixed with winter wind. Oh, my dear child, you can't leave what you are. It's written in your bones, coded in your DNA, calling to every dominant wolf who comes within a mile of your scent. You're a Luna bloodline, the last of your kind, and that makes you the most valuable commodity in the supernatural world. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. But that's not the delicious secret I came here to share. No, what I have to tell you is so much more devastating than simple bloodline politics. The words hit Luna like physical blows, each revelation stealing more breath from her lungs. Luna bloodline. She'd heard whispers of such things in pack stories, legends of wolves born to be mates to alphas, women whose very existence could strengthen or destroy pack bonds. But those were fairy tales, myths to explain why some matings produce stronger offspring than others. They couldn't be real, and they certainly couldn't apply to her, the girl who couldn't shift, who'd been rejected as worthless by her first mate. Yet, even as she denied it, memories were surfacing of the strange way other wolves had always reacted to her presence, as if she represented something they couldn't quite identify, but desperately wanted to possess. "You're lying," Luna whispered, but even as she said it, pieces began clicking into place with horrifying clarity. The way Marcus had found her so easily among millions of humans in Denver. The instant, powerful connection she'd felt to Damon despite knowing nothing about him. The persistent ache in her chest that had nothing to do with Marcus's abuse and everything to do with a loss she couldn't name. Elena watched the understanding dawn in Luna's eyes with obvious satisfaction, but there was something else there too, a cruel anticipation that suggested the worst revelations were yet to come. "Your parents knew, of course," Elena continued conversationally, as if she wasn't systematically destroying Luna's entire understanding of herself. "They died protecting your secret, killed by wolves who wanted to claim you before you came of age. But here's what no one bothered to tell you, my dear, they weren't the only ones who died for you." The shaman's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed sharper than they should be. "Tell me, Luna, do you ever dream of water? Rivers, perhaps? A voice calling your name across moving current?" The question hit Luna like a bolt of lightning, unlocking memories she'd thought were just recurring nightmares. Dreams of a young man with kind eyes and gentle hands, someone who called her name across rushing water with desperate longing. Dreams that always ended with blood in the water and a scream that might have been her own. She dismissed them as trauma responses, her mind trying to process Marcus's abuse through symbolic imagery. But Elena's knowing smile suggested something far more sinister. "I see you remember," Elena purred, settling back in her booth like a cat who'd cornered particularly interesting prey. "River Moonhaven, alpha heir of the Cascade Pack. Your true mate, bonded to you when you were 16 in a ceremony so beautiful it made the moon herself weep with joy. He loved you with the kind of devotion that inspired poetry, the kind of pure connection that happens maybe once in a generation. You are going to run away together after your 18th birthday, start a new pack where bloodline politics couldn't touch you." Luna's legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the opposite bench, staring at Elena with growing horror. The dreams weren't dreams, they were memories, suppressed and twisted, but still trying to surface despite whatever had been done to bury them. "That's impossible," she breathed, but even as she spoke, she could feel the truth of it resonating in her bones. "I would remember something like that. I would remember being mated to someone else before Marcus. Would you?" Elena asked with mock innocence. Even if powerful magic had been used to bury those memories, to replace them with carefully constructed lies? Even if the trauma of losing your true mate had been so severe that your mind cooperated with the deception rather than face the unbearable truth? The shaman leaned forward, her pale eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. "Marcus's father didn't just kill your parents, dear child. He killed River too, murdered him in cold blood, and used blood magic to sever your mate bond so violently that the psychic shock nearly destroyed your mind." The revelation hit Luna like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs and sending shockwaves of agony through her chest. The persistent ache she'd carried for years, the sense of incompleteness that had nothing to do with her inability to shift, it wasn't psychological damage from Marcus's abuse. It was the phantom pain of a severed mate bond, the psychic wound of having her soul's other half brutally torn away. "No," she whispered, pressing her hands to her chest as if she could somehow hold together the pieces of her shattered heart. "That can't be true. I would know. I would remember him." "Oh, but you do remember," Elena said with cruel satisfaction. "Every nightmare about drowning, every moment when you felt like half of yourself was missing, every time Marcus's touch felt wrong in ways you couldn't articulate, that was your soul trying to remind you of what you'd lost. River's death nearly killed you too, would have killed you if not for the memory magic that convinced your mind he'd never existed. It was mercy in a way, though I doubt you'll see it that way now." Luna stared at the shaman in growing horror, memories beginning to surface with painful clarity. Not just the dreams of water and gentle voices, but older memories. Moments of inexplicable sadness that had no source, times when she'd found herself searching crowds for a face she couldn't name, an overwhelming sense of loss that had shaped her entire personality without her understanding why. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice cracking with the weight of too many revelations. "What do you gain from destroying my sanity?" Elena's expression shifted, becoming something that might have passed for genuine regret if not for the calculating gleam in her pale eyes. "Because you need to understand the full scope of what was done to you, child. Marcus didn't just abuse you physically and emotionally, he built his entire relationship with you on the grave of your true mate. Every moment of intimacy, every declaration of love, every time he claimed you as his own, he was desecrating River's memory and violating the sacred bond that should have been yours." The magnitude of the betrayal was staggering, transforming everything Luna thought she knew about her relationship with Marcus from toxic love to systematic torture. He hadn't just failed to be the mate she needed, he'd actively prevented her from grieving the mate she'd lost, forcing her to build a life on a foundation of lies and magical deception. "The rejection ceremony," she said suddenly, understanding flooding through her like ice water. "That's why it didn't work completely. It wasn't rejecting Marcus that failed, it was trying to sever a bond that was already destroyed." "Precisely," Elena confirmed with obvious approval for Luna's quick understanding. "You can't reject what was never truly yours to begin with. The broken pieces of your bond to River were still there, festering beneath the surface, preventing any new connection from taking proper hold. Marcus could force a surface bond through proximity and declaration, but your soul knew the truth even when your mind didn't." Luna felt sick with the implications of what she was learning. Every moment of confusion during her relationship with Marcus, every time his touch had felt wrong despite her believing she loved him, every instance when she'd felt like she was betraying someone without knowing who. It had all been her suppressed memories trying to protect her from the ultimate violation. "How?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the diner's humming fluorescent lights. "How does someone steal memories of love like that?" "Blood magic of the darkest kind," Elena replied, her voice taking on the cadence of someone recounting historical facts rather than personal tragedy. "Your parents' blood, River's blood, and your own, combined with ritual sacrifice and forbidden spells that most shamans wouldn't attempt even if they had the power. Marcus's father was willing to damn his own soul for the chance to bind a Luna bloodline to his family line. The magical backlash from that kind of working should have killed him, but he was clever. He spread the cost across multiple victims, using their deaths to fuel the spell that rewrote your reality." The casual way Elena described such unspeakable evil made Luna's skin crawl, but underneath her revulsion was a growing rage that burned hotter than anything she'd ever experienced. Not just anger at Marcus and his father, but fury at the cosmic unfairness of having her agency stolen so completely that she couldn't even mourn properly. "And you knew," she said, her voice gaining strength as her anger built. "All this time, you knew what had been done to me, and you said nothing. You performed that mockery of a rejection ceremony, knowing it couldn't work, knowing I was trying to free myself from a bond that was built on murder and lies." Elena's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her pale eyes that might have been satisfaction. "I knew," she confirmed without a trace of remorse. "But revealing the truth too soon would have destroyed you completely. Your mind had to be strong enough to handle the knowledge, and your circumstances had to be secure enough that you could survive the psychological impact. Having Damon Blackthorne's protection changes everything. Now you can afford to know the truth about what was stolen from you. Afford? Luna's voice rose with indignation that drew curious glances from the few other customers in the diner. This isn't about affording anything. This is about justice for River, for my parents, for me. How many other people know? How many wolves have been walking around for years knowing that I've been living a lie built on the corpses of everyone I should have been allowed to love? More than you might think, fewer than you fear, Elena replied cryptically. The supernatural world is built on secrets, child, and this particular secret was too dangerous to share widely. River's pack believes he died in a hunting accident, never knowing their future alpha was murdered to facilitate magical theft. Your parents' friends were told they died defending their child from rogue wolves, not that they were sacrificed to fuel a memory spell. The truth was buried so deep that even most of the Silvermoon pack doesn't know the full extent of what their former leader did to claim you. Luna stared at the woman across from her, trying to process the scope of the conspiracy that had shaped her entire adult life. But you're telling me now, she said slowly. After years of silence, after letting me suffer through that broken bond and Marcus's abuse and months of thinking I was going insane, you're choosing now to reveal everything. Why? What's changed? Elena's smile was sharp as a blade, and when she spoke, her voice carried undertones of power that made the air itself seem to vibrate. What's changed is that you're no longer alone and powerless, my dear. You have the protection of the most dangerous alpha king in North America, which means you can afford to be angry. More importantly, you can afford to seek revenge. The question is, what are you prepared to do with the truth I've just given you? The offer hung in the air between them like a poisoned gift, tempting and terrifying in equal measure. Luna could feel something shifting inside her chest, the suppressed memories of River's love beginning to surface with painful clarity. She remembered gentle hands and patient kisses, someone who'd seen her inability to shift as just another facet of her uniqueness rather than a fatal flaw. She remembered planning a future built on genuine affection rather than supernatural politics, dreaming of a life where she could be herself without apology or explanation. I remember him, Luna whispered, tears streaming down her face as the full weight of her loss finally hit her. I remember how he used to laugh at my terrible jokes, how he'd spend hours just talking with me about everything and nothing. I remember the way he'd look at me like I was the most precious thing in his world, how safe I felt in his arms. The memories were coming faster now, years of suppressed love and grief crashing over her like a tide that threatened to sweep away everything she thought she knew about herself. And now you understand why Marcus could never satisfy you, why his touch always felt like a violation even when you thought you wanted it, Elena said with something that might have been genuine sympathy. You were trying to love a pale imitation while grieving a connection you couldn't remember. The psychological damage from that kind of internal conflict would have driven a weaker person completely mad. Luna looked up at Elena through her tears, seeing the shaman with new eyes. You're not here out of kindness, she said with sudden clarity. You don't care about my pain or River's memory or justice for my parents. You're here because you want something from me, and you think this revelation will make me desperate enough to give it to you. The understanding brought a strange kind of relief. At least this manipulation was honest, unlike the layers of deception that had shaped her entire adult life. Elena's expression shifted, revealing the calculating intelligence beneath her mask of concerned sympathy. Very good, she said with genuine approval. You're learning to think like someone with power instead of someone who's been victimized by it. Yes, I want something from you. I want you to become what you were born to be instead of hiding behind human normalcy and supernatural politics. The Luna bloodline carries responsibilities that go far beyond personal happiness, and now that you understand the full scope of what's been stolen from you, you can choose whether to reclaim your birthright or let your enemies continue to profit from your ignorance. The challenge was clear, and Luna found herself caught between the desire for justice and the fear of becoming something she didn't understand. But as she sat in the diner where she'd tried so hard to build a normal life, surrounded by the ghosts of lies and the weight of recovered memories, she realized that normalcy had never been an option for her. River had died because of what she was. Her parents had died protecting what she represented, and Marcus had built his entire relationship with her on the foundation of their graves. "What exactly are you proposing?" Luna asked, her voice steadier than she felt. As Elena began to explain the true scope of Luna bloodline power and the role she was meant to play in supernatural politics, Luna felt the last vestiges of her old life crumbling away. The girl who'd served coffee and folded napkin flowers was gone, replaced by someone who finally understood the price that had been paid for her ignorance and the debt she owed to the dead who'd loved her enough to die for her freedom. Luna's hands shook so violently she could barely dial Damon's number, Elena's revelations echoing in her head like shattered glass. The phone rang once before his voice filled the line, warm and concerned, and immediately focused on her distress. "Luna? What's wrong?" She tried to speak, to form coherent words that could explain the bomb that had just exploded her understanding of everything, but all that came out was a broken sob that made Damon's protective instincts flare across their bond like wildfire. The weight of learning about River's murder, about the stolen memories and the lies that had shaped her entire adult life, felt too immense for her mind to process. "Where are you?" His voice had dropped to the dangerous calm of an alpha preparing for war, and Luna could hear movement in the background, elevator doors opening, the sound of expensive shoes on marble floors. At the diner, she managed, swiping tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand. Elena Winters was here. "She's gone now, but Damon, she told me things, about my parents, about River, about everything that was stolen from me." Her voice broke again as she spoke her dead mate's name aloud for the first time, and she heard something that sounded like a growl rumble through the phone line, followed by what might have been the sound of something expensive being destroyed in the background. "Don't move," Damon commanded, his alpha voice cutting through her panic like a lifeline. "Don't talk to anyone else, don't go anywhere, don't trust anyone until I get there. Do you understand me?" Luna nodded even though he couldn't see her, drawing strength from his absolute certainty that he would fix this, would protect her from whatever danger Elena's visit represented. But even as she took comfort in his protective fury, part of her mind was already turning over the shaman's parting words, the cryptic suggestion that there were still more secrets waiting to be unveiled. 15 minutes, he said, and the line went dead, leaving Luna alone with the weight of recovered memories that felt both precious and poisonous. As Luna waited for Damon's arrival, she found herself staring at the empty booth where Elena had sat, replaying every word of their devastating conversation. The casual way the shaman had described River's murder, the calculated timing of these revelations, the strange satisfaction in her pale eyes when she'd watched Luna's world crumble. It all suggested a level of orchestration that went far beyond simple pack politics. Elena hadn't seemed surprised by Luna's reaction, hadn't hesitated over any of the brutal details, as if she'd rehearsed this conversation countless times and was simply waiting for the right moment to deliver it. The bell above the diner door chimed, but instead of Damon's familiar presence, Luna looked up to see Marcus striding through the entrance with his usual arrogant confidence. Her blood turned to ice as her ex-mate's amber eyes swept the empty restaurant before settling on her with predatory satisfaction. He wasn't alone this time. 3 pack warriors flanked him, their movements coordinated and purposeful in a way that spoke of careful planning rather than impulsive confrontation. But what made Luna's breath catch in her throat wasn't the threat they represented, but the figure who entered behind them with serene composure that seemed to make the very air shimmer with barely contained power. Elena Winters walked into the diner like she owned it, her silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights and her pale eyes fixed on Luna with an intensity that made her skin prickle with recognition. But something had changed about the shaman's demeanor. Gone was the mocking sympathy and calculated cruelty, replaced by something that looked almost like maternal pride. When she smiled at Luna across the room, it was the expression of someone who had just completed a masterpiece and was waiting for the audience to appreciate her artistry. "Perfect timing," Elena said, her voice carrying easily through the restaurant despite its conversational tone. "Marcus, dear boy, you've arrived exactly when you were supposed to." And our Luna looks appropriately devastated by our earlier conversation. Trauma is such an excellent catalyst for awakening dormant abilities, don't you think? The casual way she spoke of Luna's emotional devastation like it was a desired outcome made Marcus's warrior shift uncomfortably, but Marcus himself looked unsurprised by the shaman's words, as if he'd been expecting this exact scenario. Luna stared at the woman who had just systematically destroyed her understanding of reality, confusion warring with growing horror as the pieces of an impossible puzzle began clicking into place. "You knew he was coming," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying across the silent diner with startling clarity. "You knew exactly when he'd arrive, exactly how I'd react to what you told me. This isn't a coincidence, it's a setup." The realization should have been terrifying, but instead Luna felt a strange calm settling over her, as if some part of her had been waiting her entire life for this moment of ultimate revelation. Elena's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed sharper than they should be, and when she spoke, her voice carried undertones of power that made the windows rattle in their frames. "Oh, my precious granddaughter, you're finally beginning to understand. Every conversation, every revelation, every moment of pain and healing and growth. All of it has been leading to this exact moment. The night your parents died, the way Marcus found you in Denver, even Damon's seemingly chance encounter at this very diner, none of it was coincidence. It was all carefully orchestrated by someone who loves you more than you can possibly imagine." The word granddaughter hit Luna like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs and sending shockwaves of disbelief through her entire body. She stared at Elena with new eyes, searching for any resemblance to her father in the woman's sharp features and pale coloring. "That's impossible," she breathed, but even as she denied it, memories were surfacing, her father's few stories about his family, mentions of a grandmother who'd disappeared when he was young. Presumed dead in some pack conflict he'd never wanted to discuss in detail. "Is it?" Elena asked with mock innocence, moving through the diner with predatory grace that made her seem to glide rather than walk. Elena Ravencroft Winters, the most powerful Luna bloodline ever born, believed dead for 40 years after faking her own demise to escape pack politics that threatened to tear the supernatural world apart. "Your father was my son, Luna, which makes you my legacy, my masterpiece, my chance to finish what I started all those decades ago." The implications crashed over Luna like a tsunami, recontextualizing every interaction they'd ever had, every piece of guidance or pack politics Elena had influenced. "You're not a shaman," Luna said with dawning horror. "You never were just a pack shaman. You're the Luna bloodline that all the legends talk about, the one who supposedly could influence entire regions, who had powers that scared even the Alpha Kings." Her voice rose with each word, hysteria creeping in as she realized the true scope of the manipulation she'd been living under her entire life. Elena nodded approvingly, as if Luna were a particularly bright student who'd finally grasped a complex lesson. The first Luna bloodline to fully awaken in over 3 centuries, capable of mental influence that could reshape pack hierarchies across continents. "I disappeared because my power was becoming too dangerous, too tempting for those who wanted to use it for their own ends. But I never stopped watching, never stopped planning for the day when my bloodline would produce another with the potential to surpass even my abilities." Marcus stepped forward, his amber eyes blazing with a mixture of possessive hunger and nervous fear. "Enough talking," he growled, his gaze fixed on Luna with predatory intensity. "I came here to reclaim what belongs to me, not to listen to family histories and magical bloodline nonsense. Luna is mine by right of first claim, and I'll fight any Alpha King who thinks he can steal her from me." But even as he spoke, Luna could see uncertainty flickering in his expression, as if he was beginning to realize he'd walked into something far more complex than a simple mate retrieval. "Oh, Marcus," Elena said with genuine amusement, turning to face Luna's former mate with an expression of fond condescension. "You still don't understand your role in all of this, do you? You were never meant to keep Luna, you were meant to break her. Every act of abuse, every moment of cruelty, every psychological wound you inflicted was designed to create the trauma necessary for her power to fully manifest. Broken bones heal stronger. Traumatized minds develop defenses that become supernatural abilities, and a heart shattered by betrayal learns to protect itself in ways that can reshape reality itself. The casual admission that her abuse had been orchestrated by her own grandmother hit Luna like a betrayal, so profound it transcended anger and moved into a realm of hurt so deep it felt like drowning. "You let him hurt me," she whispered, staring at Elena with growing horror. "You watched him break me down piece by piece, watched me suffer and bleed and think I was going insane, and you did nothing because it was part of your plan." My own grandmother turned my entire life into a laboratory experiment. Elena's expression softened with what might have been genuine regret, but her voice remained steady and implacable. "I gave you the strength you needed to survive it, guided you to safety when the worst of it was over, arranged for Damon to find you when you were ready for the next phase of your development. Every scar Marcus left on your soul became a foundation for power that lesser Luna bloodlines could never access. You think your inability to shift is a defect? It's because your energy goes into something far more valuable, the ability to influence the very fabric of supernatural reality." Luna felt something breaking inside her chest, but this time it wasn't grief or trauma. It was the sound of every chain of manipulation and control finally snapping under the weight of too much revelation. "And River," she asked, her voice deadly quiet. "Was his death part of your grand plan too? Did you arrange for Marcus's father to murder my true mate just to traumatize me enough to unlock whatever twisted legacy you've been cultivating?" For the first time since entering the diner, Elena hesitated, something that might have been genuine pain flickering across her sharp features. "River's death was an unfortunate complication. Marcus's father acted without my knowledge, driven by greed and ambition that threatened to derail everything I'd worked toward. I would have preferred a different catalyst for your awakening, but I learned to work with the trauma his murder created rather than waste the opportunity it provided." The admission that even her grandmother viewed River's brutal murder as nothing more than a setback to be overcome sent Luna into a rage so pure and focused it surprised them all. She rose from the booth with fluid grace that seemed to make the air around her shimmer with barely contained energy, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that made every piece of glass in the diner vibrate ominously. "You killed him," she said, her words directed at Marcus, but her eyes fixed on Elena. "You killed the only person who ever loved me for who I was instead of what I could become, and then you erased my memories of him so I couldn't even grieve properly." And Luna's gaze shifted to Elena with contempt that could have frozen fire. "She let you do it because it served her purposes." The temperature in the diner began to drop, frost forming on the windows despite the warm night outside, and Luna felt power flowing through her veins like liquid starlight. This was what Elena had been cultivating. She realized not just supernatural abilities, but the kind of rage that could reshape the world if properly directed. "You want to see what your experiments have created?" Luna asked, her voice carrying undertones that made the building's foundation tremble. "You want to witness the power you've been so carefully nurturing through decades of manipulation and betrayal?" Elena's eyes lit up with something that looked dangerously close to maternal pride. "Yes," she breathed, her own power beginning to manifest as silver light that seemed to flow from her skin like liquid mercury. "Show me what my bloodline has become, granddaughter. Show me that all the pain and sacrifice and careful planning has been worth it." As grandmother and granddaughter faced each other across the small restaurant, power crackling between them like electricity, Marcus and his warriors suddenly realized they weren't witnessing a simple mate reclaim. They were caught in the middle of a supernatural confrontation that could level city blocks. But before Luna could fully unleash whatever abilities Elena had been cultivating in her, the diner's front door exploded inward in a shower of glass and splintered wood. Damon Blackthorne stood in the ruined doorway like an avenging angel, his golden eyes blazing with protective fury and his own power radiating outward in waves that made even Elena step back with something approaching respect. "Get away from her," he commanded, his alpha voice carrying enough authority to make Marcus's warriors drop to their knees in involuntary submission. Elena smiled at him with genuine pleasure, as if his arrival was the final piece of a puzzle she'd been assembling for decades. "Perfect timing, as always," she said with satisfaction. Now we can begin the real test. The silence in the diner stretched between them like a chasm, filled with all the words Damon had been holding back since the moment he'd first caught Luna's scent on the Denver wind. She sat across from him now, her back straight and her chin lifted with stubborn determination, and despite the hurt in her eyes, he'd never been more proud of her strength. The fragile, broken girl Marcus had discarded was gone, replaced by a woman who demanded the truth even when it terrified her. But there was something else in her expression now, a fragility that hadn't been there before Elena's devastating revelations, as if learning about her grandmother's manipulations had shaken something fundamental in her understanding of herself. Luna bloodlines are born once in a generation, maybe twice if the moon is feeling generous, Damon began, his voice carrying the weight of ancient knowledge. You're not just werewolf nobility, you're something rarer, more powerful. Your bloodline can strengthen pack bonds, enhance an alpha's abilities, even influence the fertility and health of entire territories. In the old days, Luna bloodlines were treated like goddesses, protected and revered. But as packs modernized, became more political you became. He paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound as brutal as the reality, watching Luna's face for signs that she was ready to hear the truth about what her existence meant in the supernatural world. Commodities, Luna finished flatly, and Damon winced at the accuracy of her assessment. The word hung in the air between them like an accusation, carrying all the weight of a life shaped by forces beyond her control. Breeding stock for ambitious alphas who wanted to strengthen their bloodlines and expand their power. The bitterness in her voice made his chest ache, but she deserved the unvarnished truth, no matter how ugly it was. He could see her processing the implications, understanding finally why her entire existence had been marked by violence and manipulation, why even her own grandmother had been willing to orchestrate decades of trauma to unlock her potential. That's why Marcus's father killed your parents, Damon continued, his voice gentle despite the brutality of what he was revealing. He wanted to control you, to bind you to his son before you came of age and other alphas caught your scent. But your parents fought back, died protecting you, and you disappeared into the human world where pack politics couldn't touch you. What Elena did afterward, manipulating events to bring you back into supernatural society, that was her trying to reclaim control over a bloodline she considered her property by right of genetics. Luna was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of what he'd told her, and Damon could practically see her recontextualizing every major event of her life through this new lens of understanding. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, but filled with a sadness that broke Damon's heart. So I was never really free, was I? Even when I thought I was building my own life, making my own choices, I was just waiting to be claimed by the next alpha strong enough to take me. The resignation in her tone made Damon's wolf howl with the need to comfort her, to somehow undo 20 years of cosmic unfairness that had shaped her entire existence around forces beyond her control. But as she spoke, Luna suddenly pressed a hand to her stomach, her face going pale with a pain that seemed to come from nowhere. Damon was beside her in an instant, his hands hovering over her protectively as she doubled over with what looked like intense cramping. "Luna, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice tight with concern as he scanned her for signs of injury or magical attack. But this wasn't the result of external force. This was something internal, something that made her scent spike with distress hormones he didn't recognize. "I don't know," Luna gasped, her breathing shallow and rapid as waves of pain coursed through her abdomen. "It started when you were talking about bloodlines and genetics, like something inside me was responding to the conversation." She tried to straighten up, but another wave of cramping sent her curling in on herself with a soft cry that made Damon's protective instincts flare to life. Whatever was happening to her was beyond his ability to fix, beyond anything he understood about werewolf physiology or Luna bloodline manifestations. "We're going to see Dr. Whitmore," Damon said, his voice carrying the calm authority of an alpha making a decision under pressure. Dr. Sarah Whitmore was one of the few supernatural healers in Denver, a witch-turned-physician who specialized in the unique medical needs of the supernatural community. If anyone could understand what was happening to Luna, it would be her. "Can you walk?" he asked, already calculating the fastest route to the healer's clinic, the best way to get Luna medical attention without exposing her to further danger. Luna managed to nod, though she kept one hand pressed firmly against her stomach, as if she could somehow contain whatever was happening inside her. Damon helped her to her feet, supporting most of her weight as they made their way out of the diner and into his waiting car. The drive to Dr. Whitmore's clinic passed in tense silence, broken only by Luna's occasional soft gasps when the cramping intensified. Damon found himself gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles went white, every protective instinct he possessed screaming that his mate was in danger, and he was helpless to fix it. Dr. Whitmore's clinic occupied the top floor of what appeared to be an ordinary medical building, but the moment they stepped off the elevator, Luna could feel the wards humming in the walls. Protective magic designed to keep supernatural medical secrets safe from human discovery. The healer herself was a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked brown hair and gentle hands that radiated warmth even before she touched her patients. She took one look at Luna's pale, pain-tight expression and immediately ushered them into a private examination room. "How long have you been experiencing abdominal pain?" Dr. Whitmore asked as she guided Luna onto the examination table, her trained eyes cataloging symptoms with professional efficiency. But there was something else in her expression too, a recognition that made Damon's stomach clench with apprehension. Luna bloodlines were rare enough that most supernatural healers had extensive training in their unique physiological needs, and the look on Dr. Whitmore's face suggested she was already forming theories about what might be causing Luna's distress. "Just started about 20 minutes ago," Luna replied, her voice tight with pain and growing anxiety. "We were talking about Luna bloodlines and genetics, and suddenly it felt like something inside me was awakening, I guess. Like my body was responding to information it had been waiting to hear." She tried to smile at the absurdity of her symptoms, but another wave of cramping made her bite back a gasp. "Is it possible for psychological revelations to cause physical responses in Luna bloodlines?" Dr. Whitmore's expression grew thoughtful as she began her examination, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she checked Luna's vital signs and palpated her abdomen. Luna bloodlines are more connected to their physical and emotional states than other supernaturals, she explained, her voice carefully neutral in the way that medical professionals used when they suspected something serious. Major psychological upheavals can indeed trigger physiological responses, especially if there are underlying conditions that haven't been properly diagnosed. As the examination continued, Damon found himself pacing the small room like a caged animal, every protective instinct on high alert as he watched his mate endure discomfort he couldn't fix. The clinical efficiency of the medical setting did nothing to ease his growing anxiety, especially when he noticed the subtle changes in Dr. Whitmore's expression as her examination progressed. The healer's initial calm was giving way to something that looked suspiciously like concerned surprise, and when she reached for her medical bag with deliberate care, Damon felt his stomach drop with dread. "I'm going to need to run some tests," Dr. Whitmore said carefully, her professional composure not quite masking the significance of whatever she'd discovered during her physical examination. "Luna, when was your last menstrual cycle?" The question seemed routine enough, but something in the healer's tone made both Luna and Damon go very still, as if they could sense the importance of the answer without understanding why. Luna frowned, thinking back through the chaos of the past few weeks, trying to remember details that had seemed unimportant at the time. I'm not sure," she admitted, her voice growing smaller as she realized she couldn't recall her last period with any certainty. "Everything has been so stressful since leaving the pack, and my cycles have always been irregular anyway." "Why? What does that have to do with abdominal cramping?" But even as she asked the question, Luna felt a cold certainty settling in her stomach, a terrible understanding of why Dr. Whitmore would be asking about reproductive cycles during what should have been a routine examination. Dr. Whitmore didn't answer immediately, instead focusing on drawing blood and collecting samples with the kind of careful precision that suggested she already knew what the results would show. The silence in the examination room grew heavy with unspoken possibilities, and Luna found herself counting backward through weeks and months, trying to pinpoint when she might have last had a normal cycle. The realization, when it came, hit her like a physical blow. She couldn't remember having a period since before her disastrous attempt to reject Marcus, maybe even earlier than that. Dr. Whitmore, Damon said, his voice carrying the barely controlled authority of an alpha demanding answers. What exactly are you testing for? His golden eyes were fixed on the healer with laser intensity, and Luna could feel his protective energy radiating through their mate bond like a physical force. Whatever suspicions were forming in his mind, they clearly aligned with her own growing fears about what might be causing her symptoms. I'll have the results in just a few minutes, Dr. Whitmore said diplomatically, feeding Luna's blood sample into a machine that hummed with both technological and magical energy. Luna bloodlines have unique physiological markers that require specialized testing, but I should be able to give you definitive answers very shortly. Her careful neutrality was more frightening than any dramatic revelation might have been, suggesting that whatever she suspected was serious enough to warrant extreme caution in how it was revealed. As they waited for the test results, Luna felt the cramping in her abdomen begin to subside, replaced by a different kind of discomfort, the heavy, queasy sensation she'd been attributing to stress and irregular eating habits. Now, viewed through the lens of Dr. Whitmore's questions about menstrual cycles, those symptoms took on an entirely different and terrifying significance. She caught Damon watching her with an expression of growing concern and something that might have been dawning horror, as if he was reaching the same impossible conclusion she was trying desperately to avoid. The testing machine chimed softly, and Dr. Whitmore retrieved the results with careful composure, her eyes scanning the readout with professional efficiency. But Luna could see the exact moment when the healer's suspicions were confirmed. Her shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly, and when she looked up at her patients, her expression carried the weight of information that would change everything. "Luna," she said gently, her voice carrying the kind of careful compassion reserved for delivering life-altering news, "you're pregnant. Approximately 10 weeks along, based on the hormone levels." The words hit Luna like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs and sending shockwaves of disbelief through her entire body. 10 weeks. That put conception right around the time of her failed rejection ceremony, when Marcus had claimed her one last time with possessive desperation before she'd managed to escape. The timeline was unmistakable, and even as part of her mind reeled with denial, she knew with terrible certainty whose child she was carrying. The cramping she'd experienced wasn't her body responding to psychological revelations about Luna bloodlines, it was pregnancy symptoms triggered by stress and the supernatural complications of carrying a child with mixed-pack genetics. "That's impossible," Luna whispered, but even as she spoke, she was remembering the nausea she'd attributed to anxiety, the exhaustion she'd blamed on starting over in a new city. The way her body had felt different in ways she dismissed as psychological recovery from trauma. "I would have known. I would have felt something, sensed it somehow." But even as she protested, Luna was calculating dates and symptoms, realizing that her supernatural metabolism might have masked the early signs of pregnancy in ways that would have been impossible for a fully human woman. Dr. Whitmore's expression softened with professional sympathy as she watched Luna process the implications of her diagnosis. Luna bloodline pregnancies often present differently than typical werewolf gestations, she explained gently. Your unique physiology can suppress normal symptoms until the supernatural elements of the pregnancy begin to manifest, usually around the 10 to 12-week mark. The cramping you experienced tonight was likely the first sign of those magical complications beginning to emerge. Damon had gone perfectly still beside the examination table, his face a mask of carefully controlled emotion that didn't quite hide the storm raging behind his golden eyes. Luna could feel his shock and concern through their mate bond, but underneath those surface emotions was something darker, a possessive rage directed not at her, but at the circumstances that had led to this impossible situation. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral, but Luna could hear the alpha authority thrumming underneath his words. "Whose child?" he asked, though they all already knew the answer. "Marcus's," Luna said flatly, the name feeling like poison on her tongue. It has to be Marcus's. The timeline matches perfectly with our last encounter before I left the pack. The clinical way she described what had essentially been a sexual assault made Damon's hands clench into fists, but she couldn't bring herself to use more accurate terms for what Marcus had done to her that final night. The realization that he had left her with something that would tie them together forever, even across the protective distance of her new life, felt like a violation that transcended anything he'd done to her body. "There's more," Dr. Whitmore said carefully, her attention focused on additional test results that had been processing while they absorbed the initial shock. "This isn't just any pregnancy, Luna. You're carrying a child conceived between a Luna bloodline and an Alpha with significant supernatural abilities. The genetic combination is unprecedented in recent history. This baby will likely inherit enhanced abilities from both parents, plus the unique magical properties associated with your hybrid nature." The implications of what the healer was telling them began to sink in like lead weights in Luna's stomach. Not only was she carrying Marcus's child, a permanent connection to her abuser that would complicate every aspect of her future, but the baby would be supernaturally powerful in ways that would make it a target for every ambitious Alpha in North America. The child would inherit her Luna bloodline abilities, Marcus's Alpha genetics, and potentially her own hybrid magical properties, creating a combination that had never existed before in recorded supernatural history. "What does that mean for the pregnancy itself?" Damon asked, his medical training overriding his emotional response as he focused on immediate concerns. "Are there health risks associated with this kind of genetic combination? Complications we need to prepare for?" His voice was steady, but Luna could feel the protective fury radiating from him like heat from a forge. He was already thinking like the father he might become, already calculating threats and planning defenses for a child that wasn't biologically his, but would need his protection nonetheless. Dr. Whitmore consulted her test results again, her expression growing more serious as she processed the full implications of Luna's unique situation. Luna bloodline pregnancies are inherently high risk, and adding hybrid magical genetics to the mix creates complications we can only guess at, she admitted. "You'll need specialized prenatal care from healers who understand supernatural genetics, and there will likely be manifestations of the baby's abilities even before birth. Some Luna bloodline children begin influencing their mother's powers as early as the second trimester." The thought of carrying a child who might begin exercising supernatural influence while still in the womb was both fascinating and terrifying. Luna found herself wondering what kind of person this baby would become, whether it would inherit Marcus's capacity for cruelty or her own desperate desire for freedom and safety. The genetic lottery of supernatural reproduction meant there was no way to predict which traits would dominate, which abilities would manifest first, or how the complex interplay of Luna bloodline, Alpha genetics, and hybrid magic would ultimately express itself. "I need to think," Luna said suddenly, her voice cutting through the clinical discussion with sharp finality. The weight of everything she'd learned about her grandmother's manipulations, her own supernatural heritage, and now this impossible pregnancy felt too immense to process in a sterile medical setting. "I need time to understand what this means, what my options are, how to protect this child from becoming another pawn in supernatural politics." Her hands moved instinctively to her still flat stomach, cradling a life she hadn't known existed but was already prepared to defend with everything she possessed. Dr. Whitmore nodded with professional understanding, but her expression remained serious as she prepared to send them home with information that would reshape their entire future. "Luna, I need you to understand that word of this pregnancy cannot be allowed to spread beyond this room," she said with grave intensity. "A child with your genetic heritage would be considered the ultimate prize by every major pack in North America. Until you decide how you want to handle this situation, absolute secrecy is your only protection." As they left the clinic and walked back to Damon's car in tense silence, Luna felt the weight of her new reality settling around her shoulders like a cloak she'd never asked to wear. She was pregnant with the child of her abuser, mated to an alpha king who'd had no say in acquiring a ready-made family, and carrying what might be the most supernaturally powerful baby born in centuries. The future she'd been tentatively building with Damon now included complications that would test every aspect of their relationship and force them both to make choices they'd never anticipated having to face. "Whatever you decide," Damon said quietly as he helped her into the passenger seat, "I'll support you. This changes everything and nothing. You're still my mate, still the woman I've been waiting for my entire life. A baby doesn't change that, regardless of whose DNA contributed to its creation." His words should have been comforting, but Luna could hear the tension underneath them, the uncertainty of a man trying to navigate circumstances that defied every expectation he'd had about starting a family. As they drove through the Denver night toward an uncertain future, Luna found herself wondering if this was what Elena had been planning all along. Not just awakening her supernatural abilities, but creating a situation so complex and morally ambiguous that every choice would reshape the supernatural world. The pregnancy felt like the final piece of her grandmother's elaborate puzzle, the ultimate test of whether Luna would embrace her destiny or fight to forge her own path, despite the impossible circumstances surrounding her. Luna's answer was cut off by the sound of shattering glass as Marcus burst through the diner's front window in a spray of glittering fragments and barely contained rage. He'd brought reinforcements this time, six-pack warriors who spread out through the small restaurant with military precision, blocking every exit and filling the air with the scent of aggression and violence. But it was Marcus himself who commanded attention, his eyes blazing amber with fury and something that looked dangerously close to madness. "Did you really think you could steal what belongs to me and I'd just let it slide?" Marcus snarled, his gaze fixed on Damon with the kind of hatred that could only come from a lifetime of perceived inadequacy. "Luna is mine by right of first claim, bonded to me by pack law, and I'll die before I let some city alpha take her from me." His words carried the desperate edge of a man who'd lost everything and had nothing left to lose, which made him infinitely more dangerous than a rational opponent. Damon rose from the booth with fluid grace, his body shifting into the predatory stillness of an alpha preparing for battle. "The only thing you had a right to was her trust, and you threw that away the first time you raised your hand to her," he said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made lesser wolves submit without conscious thought. "Your bond is severed, your claim is void, and if you're smart, you'll walk away while you still can." But Marcus was long past smart, consumed by the toxic combination of wounded pride and supernatural possessiveness that had driven him to risk everything for a woman he'd thrown away. "She carries my mark," he growled, gesturing toward Luna with one clawed hand. "My scent, my bond, my claim written in her very DNA. Pack law says what's mine stays mine, and no amount of alpha king posturing is going to change that." His warriors shifted restlessly, uncomfortable with challenging someone of Damon's status, but bound by loyalty to follow their beta into hell if necessary. Luna watched the standoff with growing horror, seeing how the two males circled each other like predators preparing to fight over territory. She was the territory, she realized with sick clarity, not a person with agency and choice, but a prize to be won or lost depending on who proved stronger in combat. The thought filled her with rage that burned away her fear, replacing it with determination that surprised them all. "Stop," she said, her voice cutting through the testosterone-charged tension like a blade. When both alphas turned to look at her, she stood slowly, meeting each of their gazes in turn. "I'm not a bone for you two to fight over. I'm a person, and I choose who I want to be with." She looked directly at Marcus, her chin lifted with stubborn courage. "And I choose Damon. I reject you, Marcus Blake, completely and finally, and I accept Damon Blackthorne as my mate and my alpha." The words rang through the diner like a declaration of war, and Marcus's roar of fury shook the windows in their frames. The battle that followed was swift, brutal, and decisive. Marcus lunged for Luna with claws extended, intent on dragging her back to his territory whether she wanted to go or not. But Damon intercepted him mid-leap, his own wolf surging to the surface in a display of power that made the air itself seem to vibrate with dominance. The two wolves collided with bone-jarring force, rolling across the floor in a tangle of fangs and fury while Luna pressed herself against the wall, watching her past and future fight for the right to claim her. When it ended, Marcus lay unconscious on the diner floor, his warriors standing down in the face of their alpha's obvious defeat. Damon stood over him, his expensive suit torn and bloody, but his golden eyes blazing with victorious satisfaction. He looked at Luna across the wreckage of the diner, and she saw everything she needed to know written in his expression: love, devotion, and the promise that he would fight any battle, face any enemy, to keep her safe. "It's over," he said simply, and Luna finally believed him. 6 months later, Luna stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of Damon's penthouse, watching the sun set over Denver's skyline in shades of gold and crimson that matched her mate's eyes. The city spread out below them like a glittering sea, beautiful and dangerous and full of possibilities she was only beginning to explore. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman transformed, no longer the broken, frightened girl who'd fled Marcus's abuse, but someone confident and radiant, wearing her Luna bloodline like the crown it had always been meant to be. The mating ceremony had been small and private, witnessed only by Damon's inner circle and the pack members Luna had slowly begun to trust. She'd worn her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, and when Damon had spoken the ancient words that bound them together permanently, Luna had felt the last pieces of her shattered heart finally heal. The bond between them was everything Marcus's had never been: respectful, passionate, built on genuine affection rather than supernatural compulsion or political advantage. Sal had been surprisingly understanding when Luna explained she'd be leaving the diner to take on responsibilities as an Alpha King's mate. "I always knew you were destined for something bigger than serving coffee to truckers," she'd said with tears in her eyes, pressing an envelope full of cash into Luna's hands despite her protests. "Just promise me you'll be happy, honey. That's all any of us really wants, a chance to be happy with someone who sees our worth." The old woman's wisdom had stayed with Luna through all the challenges of adapting to pack politics and supernatural society. Damon emerged from his office looking tired but satisfied. The day's business concluded in time for them to share dinner and the quiet intimacy they both craved after months of public scrutiny. Every major pack in North America wanted to meet the Luna bloodline, who'd claimed the heart of the most powerful Alpha King, and Luna was still learning to navigate the dangerous waters of supernatural politics, where a wrong word or misplaced gesture could start wars. But with Damon at her side, she was discovering strength she'd never known she possessed. "The council meeting went well?" Luna asked, accepting the glass of wine Damon offered and leaning into his warmth as he joined her at the window. His arm came around her waist automatically, a gesture so natural it felt like breathing, and she marveled again at how perfectly they fit together despite their different worlds. "Very well," Damon replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "The Silvermoon Pack has been officially disbanded, their territory redistributed among packs with more competent leadership. Marcus has been stripped of his beta status and exiled. He'll spend the rest of his life as a lone wolf, which is exactly what he deserves." But as they stood together watching darkness claim the city, neither of them noticed the figure on the building across the street, watching them through high-powered binoculars with eyes that glowed pale silver in the shadows. Neither of them saw the woman lower the binoculars to reveal Elena Winter's satisfied smile, or heard her whisper words that would have chilled their blood if they'd understood their meaning. Phase 1 complete. The Luna bloodline is exactly where we need her to be. Now we begin the real work. For the first time in her life, Luna felt truly safe in Damon's arms, but in the depths of the city's supernatural underground, forces were already moving to ensure that safety would be nothing more than a beautiful illusion.